right. Looks like we're live now. Michael and I are just joking in the background that we can never tell when we're live. So, all right.
Right.
Well, welcome everyone to the December 2023 EdTech Chat with Michael and Amy. We are here rounding out the year. Looking back on everything over the past year and kind of taking stock of some of the things that we've talked about, but also some of the things that we are seeing growing conversation about. And one of those things is open source and open education resources. Um, Increasingly, we're seeing college campuses around the globe want to access some of these open education resources, whether that's in the form of textbooks or other types of resources. And often the question comes to us, where do I even find this stuff? And how did all of this get started? That things are just kind of open source. And so we thought we would end the year talking a bit about open source, which is something that is near and dear to both of our hearts. We are very, very much advocates for open source software, open education resources. I think we both appreciate the equity that these bring, but also the innovation that they bring, because when something's open source, lots of people can contribute. So that's what we're going to talk about this month. I'm going to kick it over to Michael. I know that he has a lot of background working in not just the open source software that we work with, but also just in the open education resource area. So I figured I'd kick it over to you, Michael, and you can kind of get us started with a little bit of like kind of background and things that you want to share about open education.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a good starting point that we were chatting about a little bit earlier is just what is open source? What are open educational resources? Because they are two distinct things, even though they have a lot of overlapping features. So essentially what we're talking about are mechanisms that allow people who do things like create software or tools to be able to share those with others without those people worried about being sued. That's probably the simplest way that I could put it. So it's simply put a better way to share content or software or platforms or tools with others in a way that they can not just freely use them, but very often have access to the source code behind those applications to be able to improve them. The most obvious example that I think fits well in this call is Moodle as a learning management system is an open source learning management system platform, unlike some of the other LMS offerings out there. So that means that the source code is available for everyone. Anyone can contribute fixes for things like bugs or security improvements. People can build their own plugins. People can build their own features and contribute to products and new initiatives that are coming up to improve the LMS. So that's one thing that I really love about open source. Parallel to that, we also have open educational resources, which again, it's just a mechanism for a content creator to share their resources with others so that those resources can either be improved upon or repurposed, usually in educational environments. I think a really obvious example would be, if I take a picture and Amy thinks, wow, that's an amazing picture. I would love to be able to use that picture in a presentation, maybe put it in a brochure. Like I'd love to put it on my website. Right now, it just basically going off of copyright law, if Amy were to take that picture without my permission, like I could technically sue and I could sue the company, it would become a whole thing. But we have multiple mechanisms now, primarily a licensing format called Creative Commons that lets me take that picture and say, hey, I'm actually going to openly license this. So anyone, including Amy, can use this image however they see fit. They can use it to make money. They can use it to put on a website. They could just make it their desktop wallpaper. They can duplicate it as many times as they want. They can Photoshop it into another image. They can use it in a lot of different ways. So it's a way for me to share that content with others in a way that protects them legally, but also allows them to get high value content that can be repurposed in multiple ways. So essentially it's about sharing. It's about taking the things that you've created and sharing them with others, but it's also about you having the ability to create your own things or modify existing things and also share them with others in a way that improves them somehow. So I look at it as a pretty core feature of learning environments and learning experiences, regardless of whether you're in the world of education or if you're in, let's say, corporate or nonprofit or some sort of organization in more of the learning and development fields.
I agree. I think, when we think about the overall impact and importance both of open source and open education resources, and you touched on this a bit, um, it levels the playing field, so to speak, right? So if I'm going to school, or I'm wanting to learn more, I'm doing L&D or training or professional development, anything. I am limited sometimes by the ability to pay for some of these resources. We see this particularly true in higher ed. Textbook prices were expensive when I was there, and they're even more expensive now. Um, and what happens is when we are using certain types of textbooks, there isn't always an ability to curate a collection of information there from industry experts, right? So with open education resources such as OpenStax, which Jay in our comments is talking a bit about, you have that opportunity now to create textbooks. I had many professors in college who wrote their own textbook because they had trouble finding one that really suited what we were trying to learn, and they would distribute that, and it was a no cost. But um, you're talking about potentially saving people up to $10,000 in textbooks costs over the course of a 4-year college degree by using open education resources. But also, if you find an error, you can let the author know. It can get updated, tends to be updated very quickly. Um, but I think that what we find is that this increases learners' access to resources, to education, to lifelong learning. And these are all things that we're trying to promote, right? We're always trying to build this culture of lifelong learning. And not only do we create resources that work really well for the people delivering content and facilitating that, and work well for people who are learning that content, we are also creating resources that are portable. They are transferable. They can be updated. They can be accurate. They can quickly change to reflect changing research, emerging technology. Um, so we're starting to see this way to make sure that information is always accessible to people. And I come back to Jay's mentioning OpenStax, and you mentioned very early on, Michael, the concept of being sued.
Mhm.
Obviously, when we talk about things like OpenStax as an open education resource, one of the concerns is the loss of revenue for college campuses or bookstores when people are using an open source solution, right? So that comes up pretty frequently and can stymie the use of some of the open education resources. I love that you use the example of if you have a picture and I really want to use it because this actually happens all the time. Choosing or taking pictures is definitely not my forte, and Michael is much better at creating a really nice visual experience to go with a lot of what we talk about. Um, and I know I was very lucky. Michael turned me on to something called Pexels very about a year or so ago, where I can actually go and find the type of imagery that I want to use. And sometimes the imagery I need is very like use case specific. I had a project yesterday and I really needed to be able to have a jet in the sky flying with a contrail, and it needed to be right justified for the thing that I was doing. And I was able to go in, put that in, and actually get that image, and then just follow whatever attribution rights are in there. Often I don't have to attribute it at all, or maybe I attribute it to the person who took the picture, but it's there and it's free for me to use. This is so helpful, and it saves so much time, and it lets me really focus on developing my content and my delivery and getting together the facts and the information I want to share versus spending hours upon hours trying to create a graphic for something or trying to create the perfect photo for something.
Mhm.
So I think that there are other contributions there too, right? Just in terms of improving the efficiency of being able to access resources means that you can focus on the real day to day of getting that information out there, supporting learners, things like that. Um, and I can see I'm just kind of looking at the chat here, also that's on LinkedIn, and people are talking about Openverse and things like that. Pexels, obviously, everyone's favorite. We all love to grab the photos from there, and so you start to see why there's so much importance in OER and that continued development there. Um, Accessibility, not just in terms of accessibility for users who may have a disability, but also accessibility in terms of equity. Everyone can
Mhm.
access this. That creative development. Our LMS, as Michael mentioned, is based on top of open source software, And then we build additional features that we often open source back to the community as well. And then we elicit feedback, and then we can take that feedback and we can continue to develop and innovate these pieces. And I think that's what's really creates a very unique environment, being able to have that kind of um, conversation back and forth about what's working well in the resource, what could be changed, and being able to contribute. Um, and I know that one of the things you and I have talked a lot about is how open source software really started to pave the way for the development of open education resources, um, which have influence on other initiatives too. So, do you want to talk a little about like some of the other initiatives that we've seen grow out of the open source to open education to what are some other things that we're sort of seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. When we think about the democratization of content in this way, there are a couple of things that have really led to the proliferation of openly licensed content, especially under the umbrella of open educational resources. And part of that has been, admittedly, the non-open source side. So we all have a camera on our phone. It's probably the best camera that any of us have ever owned, unless we have professional recording equipment. So we are all now capable of capturing our own images and videos in surprisingly high quality. But we also get access to software and tools that are sometimes freely provided with the hardware that we purchase, or that are open source. And we can then turn around and create media or create resources very quickly and easily now that can then be redistributed to others through a mechanism of open educational resources. So finding a way to openly license that content. I think about how my own workflows here are impacted. So even though we have our own training courses on OpenLMS Academy that usually have a cost associated with them, like a per seat cost, we create high quality multimedia resources to support those courses, to provide tutorials, to provide explanations of the things that we're talking about. And I've got a pretty nice microphone here. Microphone is not open source, but it doesn't sound, picture perfect right out of the box. I have to edit the audio in the videos that I record for our courses, and I use a piece of open source software called Audacity to do that. I had not really dabbled in audio recording before or audio editing, and here now I have this free tool that, because it's open source, has a lot of really great plugins that help me with my workflow. One example that I love to give is if you're using a really good microphone, sometimes it captures you taking a breath, and that's kind of annoying. But there was a plugin someone developed that actually just wipes that all out of the audio recording. So I put that into my workflow now when I edit our videos. So even when you're creating things that might be in a more corporate or for-profit sort of context, you can still leverage that open source software to make your workflows better, to make your products better, to make the things that you're creating even stronger. And I just love how it sort of builds into all of these different areas. But yeah, better access to higher quality software, especially open source software, I think has really extended what people are able to create and then turn around and sometimes share those resources back to the larger community.
Absolutely. And you talked about the democratization of education and resources as a whole and content development. And I think that's really an advantage for educators as well. Um, Often when you are teaching, you're kind of in a bubble. I apologize if you hear my dog.
No,
The
I
mail is being
realized the mail
delivered.
was there.
Yeah, mail's here. But when you are teaching, sometimes you're in a bubble, especially during COVID when we weren't able to get out and go to like different places. And connect with different people. And so being able to have this type of these resources is a great way for us to connect with other people, share ideas, talk about things that have been working well and haven't been working well. So this community sort of forms around OER, and you can kind of see that in the chat that's happening here. Gina mentions that every piece of software that they use is open source. So imagine the community that gets created when you have a bunch of like-minded people coming in, recognizing, I say this all the time, we are not the keepers of the knowledge. Our role here is to share it. And that's what open source is. Sharing that, building a really amazing scaffold to be able to deliver professional development, training, teaching, learning, education. And so the advantage for educators and learners is just so far beyond the fact that it improves your efficiency and you have access to these resources, you now have these professional communities of like support. So where you can go and talk with other people, you can explore other things out there. I'll never forget the first time I was teaching an environmental science course, and I had a textbook, and it was an older version. I was reading something in it, and I thought, I don't think this is accurate anymore. And I went over to OpenStax, and there was a book, and there was the research, and I was able to reference this for my students and say, this is what we thought before, this is what we know now. That was so helpful, but it also let me connect with other environmental scientists. I've been out of that world for a very long time, focusing primarily in education, but not in teaching those courses. I was an environmental scientist in my previous life. But it allowed me to come in and join this community of educators, and it was really inspirational but also very encouraging for me to see that a lot of people were there trying to do the same thing. And it really kind of sparked my interest even further in open education resources. Previously I was really focused on the open source software, but just seeing all of the resources, and I still am kind of a software geek for some of the open source stuff that's out there. But yeah, so just so many advantages there. I know that, we mentioned Pexels already. We've seen people share a couple of their favorite OER tools and platforms in the chat here. Um, what are some of your favorites, though?
Yeah, and I'm gonna see if Maddie can pop my screen back up there again. But there were a couple of resources that I'm a really big fan of. I know we touched on Pexels a little bit earlier, but I want to mention two things about this site that sometimes come up. Oh, I forgot why I do the yeah, I
Yeah.
get balloons now. My camera's got this thing where if I make a thumbs up or something, I get fun stuff. Um, so two things that I really love about Pexels. First, whenever I talk about OER, specifically for images, a lot of people mention a site called Unsplash, which is a site where the images are provided under usually a license called Creative Commons Zero, which means you have dedicated your work directly to the public domain. So if someone uses that image, they forget to provide attribution, that is totally okay. They can use that work in any way that they want. They don't necessarily have to provide attribution, even though it's always nice to do that so the content creator gets a bit more notoriety. But whenever I bring up Pexels, people will be like, oh, well, I use Unsplash. Pexels is functionally a search engine for Creative Commons Zero photos. In other words, photos that you can use for any purpose for free without even having to worry about attribution, and it also searches through Unsplash as one of its sources. So that's one thing that I wanted to mention. The other is you can also use the video feature here. So they have openly licensed video as well. I have started for my in-person presentations swapping out stock photos with stock videos and have gotten a really positive response from that. So if I just search for, college campus in here, we have multiple videos that just immediately pop up. I can download these. I can incorporate them into my slides. I can incorporate them into my own video projects. And these are all freely available to use, Creative Commons Zero. There's a wide variety of things in here. So this is just a really quick search. I can even say, like, actually, I'm looking just for, horizontal video. This will be for something that goes up on YouTube. Or if this is for social media, I can look for something that's just vertical videos. So I have something that's already in the right perspective and shot specifically in that perspective. Love that site. I know we talked a bit about Audacity and open source audio editor, so I will skip over that and encourage folks to reconceptualize what OER actually is, because I know we keep accidentally doing that. I know we keep talking about open source in terms of software or educational resources, but it can also extend into the physical world when we talk about openly licensing content. So one of my favorite examples of this is a light board. This is open source hardware, as they've termed it, but it's essentially those videos where you see someone writing on a whiteboard, and it's filmed usually in a dark studio. I will mute this, but sort of make it, see if we can make this full screen. Nope, it won't let me go full screen on that one. That's okay. We'll just open this in a new tab. And this person is literally just writing on a whiteboard. So they're actually writing on a whiteboard. It's just the lighting. The entire board itself is just a big panel of glass with light built into the frame. They film it through the glass while they're wearing a microphone, and then they flip the image in post processing. And this is openly sourced hardware. So if you wanted to build one of these at your business or school or organization, they have the plans available at lightboard.info. So that is all freely available, ready to go if anyone wants to use it. So you can also Google Lightboard, one word. So open source hardware is certainly a thing. Another project that I've been following for a really long time that I find to be really fascinating is something that a professor at Elon University in North Carolina is working on. His name's Eric Bauer. And what he is doing is he's using a process to capture 3D images of human skeletal bones. What he is trying to do is eventually create 3D models of every bone in the human body. And these are models that could be explored in 3D space. I think this is a femur. So I'm going to let this 3D model load in here. And what I can do is, if I'm on this site, I can certainly drag and click and zoom in and see different parts of this. This image is actually annotated so I can learn about the different parts and pieces. This is a democratizing sort of open source. What I love about this is if you don't have access to higher quality materials, like a cadaver lab, or even like a model skeleton that is meant to mimic this, you can still explore high quality relics in a 3D space. And not only that, this website allows you to download the models and then 3D print them. So if you are at a school that cannot afford higher cost resources, what you can do instead is download these models, use 3D printer and maybe a dollar or two of plastic filament, and 3D print your own for courses to use, for students to use. And I find that to be really, really fascinating. The last thing that I'll mention is, again, another reconceptualization of OER, and that is H5P. I don't just love that H5P is an open source technology built into another open source technology, which is why it's on all of your sites. Um, but it's this beautiful content creation platform. You can reuse openly licensed content. Like if someone else has made an H5P activity and they want to openly license it, you can download, you can upload into your site. It will work just as well on your site as it will on theirs because it's an open source technology. But this is sort of like an old JFK moment, like ask not what you can do for H5P, ask what H5P can do for you. Or I think I flipped it around, but we always talk about OER in terms of like what we get out of it, like the money that we save or the people that we help or the things that we're building, without taking that extra step of realizing that those resources exist because someone shared them. And we are just as capable of creating high quality resources and sharing them with others. And that's what I love about H5P. There is a dedicated metadata field in every single H5P activity that you create. This is where you can put in the author, the source. You can also assign a license to your H5P activity, including that Creative Commons Zero license that I mentioned earlier, where it goes straight into the public domain. So I can assign that license. I can download this H5P activity and I can make it available for other people to use. So if I've already got H5P activities that I've been building, it is not a very big step for me to flip this around and all of a sudden just share it with others as my own open educational resource as a way to give back to the community. So those are some things that I absolutely love. I'll go ahead and stop the screen sharing there. Amy, how about you? What really floats to the top for you?
Yeah, so for me, as some of you may know, we're a bit of a 3D printing nerd household over here. So one of my favorites is Thingiverse, and I'll share out as well. Screen. So Thingiverse is great, especially if you're just getting started with something let me pick my screen, like 3D printing. So when we were first starting with 3D printing in our house, we started to use Thingiverse by recommendation. Actually, someone who's on the call here, Gina Wilson, who's on the call here with us today. I saw her in the chat. She recommended Thingiverse to us, and this is great. It's a great place to go and download prints for 3D. printing. So you get the plans, you can resize things. We have an open source splicer that we use that slices everything, and we can resize and then send it right over to our 3D printer. And this was for a very low end 3D printer. This was not something top of the line. I wanted to see how it's going to work out here. But what I like about this is that this actually really is useful in terms of the education world, where perhaps you've gotten a grant or somehow you've ended up with a 3D printer and you want to have students start to think about the fun sides of 3D printing, but also the practical side. So when we started here, we started looking at things. We started looking at 3D printing different objects, which then parlayed into learning a lot about 3D printing of houses. So it was a great conversation starter. But being able to have access to something like this, where perhaps you don't have that sort of AutoCAD type experience to be able to create the blueprints, to create your own print, this is one of my favorites. Um, I have a couple things. We've already mentioned OpenStack, so I won't go over it. I will show you quickly. This is Openverse. This is another place where you can get images. I searched for ancient ruins, and as you can see, I have lots of different images in here, high quality ones, different aesthetics. It's one of my other favorite things for grabbing images. And then I have two other favorites because I really couldn't just decide between them. So GIMP is an image manipulation program that's open source. So if I want to create my own art or edit images that I have or that I've taken, GIMP is a great way to do that. So sometimes you may find the perfect image for something, and then you think, but I need it to have a sepia tone, or I need it to look weathered, or I need to do something different with it, change the ratio of something, enhance something in the photo, in the image. GIMP is a great way to do that. And so it is one of my favorites. My other obviously is the tried and true WordPress. And so I am over here at opensource.com, which is just where we go and we learn about WordPress. So WordPress is a great way to it's built as a content management system, but you'll often find it is a website front for things. So we have a lot of people who have a WordPress storefront or front, and people use that to connect to their OpenLMS site. We see it a lot with Moodle as well. Makes sense, open source to open source. But it is definitely one of those things that lets you create really beautiful websites, blogs, and other types of content using templates. It's completely open source. Probably most people on this call either have a WordPress site for something, or have worked with it or heard of it before. And obviously, you can see in the upper right hand corner, it's supported by Red Hat. Red Hat being a Linux company, and Linux also being an open source loss of words, can't operating
Operating
system.
system. Yep.
Goodness, I have a head
No
cold,
worries.
and you can tell. But I really like WordPress as well. I also like WordPress not just for the open source, but that community that's created around the use of WordPress. If you go in here, obviously there are lots of blogs about things to help you not only build and use with WordPress, but also to understand things like the migration from PHP 7.4 to 8.1, which is something that, if you are kind of on the technical end of things, is a big thing happening right now for everything that employs PHP. So those are some of my favorites. Definitely Thingiverse is a bit of a niche thing. You have to be a 3D printer to really get a lot out of that. But I do think that, things like OpenStax for education resources, WordPress if you're wanting to create a web presence or even teach people how to build websites, and then anything photo related is super helpful. Always having a graphical accompaniment to what you're talking about or what you're presenting really helps to bring a lot more impact. So being able to access those types of resources, I think, is really, really helpful.
Yeah,
So
I
those are
one
mine.
one thing we sometimes miss in all this is, like, just a remarkable return on investment that you get with open educational resources. I hate to put everything in financial terms, but certainly we've talked to plenty of clients over the past year who are being very mindful about their budgets, who are facing, sometimes much tighter constraints, what they can spend and where they can spend it. and to look at open educational resources and open source software as a new avenue for content creation, for incorporating resources, high quality resources into courses is pretty fantastic. I think one of my favorite examples was from a business course at a school where I used to work, which is Elon University. I have to give two examples from the same school, but I'm going to call out Elon University again. And what they did was they took a $2,000 grant and used that to fund the purchase of an old business textbook from a textbook publisher. They then turned around, made some updates and modifications to that text, and then openly licensed it. So that made it available for free to all the students who enrolled in that business course that used that textbook. Given the anticipated enrollment for that course, they saved students over $85,000 for an initial investment of just $2,000 to buy that older resource from a textbook publisher. And I look at other schools and businesses and organizations that are able to make really remarkable gains in terms of saving money while also incorporating high quality resources or using high quality tools that are much more budget friendly, I think, when we're trying to get down to like the dollars and cents of how do we continue our work in a way that's productive and is not going to put a big strain on a budget that might already be strained. So again, I hate to bring up the financials so frequently, but it is one of the really key benefits of open educational resources is they are so accessible from that particular perspective. Oh, I think you're double muted.
That $85,000, that's such a concrete figure that is important to understand. I know one of our clients, Guilford Technical Community College in North Carolina, was the recipient of a grant through Metallica's Scholars Initiative this year. And that grant of $50,000 helps to cover books and textbooks and resources for students at that school. So understanding the impact of being able to have open education resources, the actual dollar amount is pretty staggering when we think about it.
Mhm.
That one course was $85,000. This one school received $50,000, but overall, Metallica has contributed almost $6 million toward funding education resources, so textbooks and things like that. Yeah, for students around, around our country. And I think what that does is just underpin the value of open education. So everything that we contribute comes back. So it's such an investment. Every little bit that we bring to it, every time we use open education resources, it's an investment in our students, in those resources, and learners, in lifelong learning. And then it really is underscored by an actual dollar value. We can actually equate this to a monetary value saved for people. And when you think about how much textbooks might cost and the amount of debt that adds to being able to achieve education or achieve a degree, I think it's really significant there to understand the overarching impact, which is obviously, like we said, we don't want to always talk about the dollar value, but when we relieve that burden from people, it opens them up to be able to be, to learn without the worry of paying for these things. But it
Mhm.
also teaches people, not just our students, but as a whole, that there are lots of places that you can go and get accurate, trusted information and resources for anything. So if I just decided I wanted to learn more about a topic, I could go out and do that. And we do that all the time, right? Like, so we can think on a
Mhm.
very small scale with that about the number of times you Google, how do I replace the tile in my bathtub, which is in my bathroom, right?
Mhm.
And you learn that because you have a free resource. You wouldn't have access necessarily to that information or learn that skill if you had to pay to gain access to a tutorial video or an article written, or same thing with the 3D printing, if you had to pay for the software just to be able to use the printer that you've already paid for. So I think that it opens these doors to um, a different approach to finding information, bringing it in, synthesizing it, connecting with people, contributing back information that we have. I think it also shows people the value of what they know. So sometimes we feel like, I know this thing, I know it, nobody's gonna want to know about it. People don't want to hear about it. And then you connect with an open education resource group and you find out, hey, someone needs contribution for this chapter of a
Mhm.
book, and it's something you know a lot about, and now all those that information and that knowledge that you've worked for has even more value, and your ability to contribute to things has more value as well. And I think those are some of the things too, that matter. And your example of buying the rights to a textbook, having the faculty make the changes, all this knowledge the faculty has, now becomes something that doesn't just benefit the course they're teaching right now, the students who are in front of them now, their day to day right now. It actually will benefit for years to come because they've
Mhm.
contributed to this resource that will be used in many places. So I think
Yeah.
that's a pretty cool thing about open source, open education resources and things like that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I know we always like to be fair about topics, and both of us would say there are some tremendous benefits. We're huge supporters of OER. If we were taking like an honest look at some of the challenges that come along with OER, you're still going to have the same time commitments that you do getting educational resources from any source. Is really what it is. So, if I were looking at a paid textbook from a textbook publisher, I would still need a group of people to look through that textbook, evaluate its content, make sure that there aren't any obvious errors or mistakes, make sure that it fits the goals of the course. And you would still need to do that with, say, an openly licensed textbook on OpenStax, which I know you mentioned before. So there's still going to be that time commitment when you are reviewing resources to make sure that that they're up to snuff, that things make sense, that it's a high quality resource like you expect, that there aren't any obvious errors. The nice thing about an OER is if there is an obvious error, you can fix it. Uh, but you usually have license to do that and modify it before it goes into a course that you're building. But there will still be that time commitment. I know we used to lovingly joke that Moodle as an open source learning management system is free in the same way that a puppy is free, right? You still need to, you can get a free puppy, but the vet is not free, the leashes are not free, the food and the bowls are not free, the training's not free, the toys aren't free, all the vaccinations that they're going to need, those are not free. So it sort of goes along those lines. We look at Moodle LMS, we would not be in business if we were not providing hosting and support and training to the clients that we serve. So there is a time commitment that does go along with open source, just like there is with any educational resource. But outside of that, it's really hard to think of other drawbacks that go along with this type of an approach to education. And I really do encourage folks, like, you have probably made content at some point or another that you could just turn around and openly license so other folks can use it. And there are plenty of websites and platforms out there for you to share your work with others. So I just want to plant that bug, and hopefully it sticks with a couple of folks who would be interested in doing that in the future. But Amy, are there any other challenges or considerations you can think of off the top of your head that folks might want to keep in mind if they're using OERs or open source software?
I think that when you're wanting to start to use open education resources, particularly textbooks, you are likely to come up against a challenge for the revenue that may be lost in terms of people purchasing textbooks through perhaps your college bookstore or things like that. And that's something to kind of be prepared for. Looking at, outcomes, there's lots of data on outcomes if we're using open education resources and how that can benefit people. I think that's always kind of one thing. The other thing I think that we have to be prepared for when we're wanting to use these things is much like AI, there is sometimes a misconception about what open means. Um, you know, uh, Having worked in higher ed before, there was often this kind of undercurrent of intellectual property and people stealing our content and things like that. And, inevitably you will run up against questions about the integrity of the resources. How do you know that these have been vetted? How do you know that this information is accurate? And if you put things out there, then people are stealing what we've created. And so it's a little bit of, doing a little marketing. You have to do a little kind of internal marketing to help people understand that open doesn't mean that it's easy to tamper with or to create things that are inaccurate. Actually, on the contrary, because it's open, so many people are reviewing it. And if you have a mistake, it's actually more likely to be caught and brought to your attention so you can correct it. So you actually have a pretty strong data integrity process that surrounds these things. Um, and then the concept of intellectual property. Oftentimes, when people are creating resources for training or education, they are creating the resources based off of information in a proprietary textbook. So really the intellectual property isn't really theirs to begin with. But I think what we do here is we help people to understand that this isn't people trying to steal things in a nefarious way. It's people trying to create a collective of information sharing. And we have things that we can contribute to that. And then there's also things that we can take away. But I think as you start to think about how do you stay ahead of the curve, how do you get out in front of this, how do you start to adopt these resources, those are two of the things that I think come up most frequently that you have to really think about. Um, and you know, that's when we think about what the future is going to look like. I think we will see a greater trend toward open for many, many reasons. I think people like the democracy of being able to share and being able to have, contributions and work as a collective toward things. I think it's going to become something that we see used quite heavily, especially in terms of making sure that there's education in countries that have emerging economies or where education has historically not been as uh, accessible for people. We're going to see the use of open education resources more and more. So I think it's important for people, institutions, organizations to really think about how they're going to approach this. Start to create your use policies for OER. Think about the benefit for your particular students in your institution. And those are some of the things that I kind of think of in terms of things to be aware of, things to think about. Not really so much problems with the technology and the sources and the resources themselves, but sort of the logistics around using them. Michael, are there other things that you think of when you think of how does an organization stay ahead of the curve? How do they be maybe an innovator in this area that people should consider?
Yeah, there are a couple of things that I think would be helpful to supplement essentially what you were saying. Um, One is an open acknowledgement that there is an initial time cost associated with open educational resources. So while you are saving on the financial cost, there's really no way to avoid a time cost when you're incorporating new resources, regardless of where they've come from. I think one of the best things I've heard an instructor say about this was they acknowledge, it does take a little more time and effort to curate these resources, but it's worth it. And most of that work will be done the next time they teach the course. So, really, we're talking about mostly a one time investment into this. I think it would also be worth taking your team and the instructors that you work with through a little bit of an overview of what Creative Commons actually is and how it works from a copyright standpoint. If it helps, I usually explain Creative Commons as a form of copyright through the metaphor of a burger. And if you're vegetarian or vegan, it'll just be a Beyond Burger. But the idea is you could order a burger plain, right? Or you can get lettuce or tomato or pickles or mayo or mustard on there. And Creative Commons sort of works the same way. At its core, you might have the Creative Commons buy, which just means you can freely use this for whatever you want. You just have to give me credit and say that I made the original work. So by is just the attribution. Who is it by? You can add additional toppings to that burger. Like you can use this, but not to make money. So it's non-commercial use only. If you share it with others, you have to share alike. So you have to use the exact same license that I used when I shared it with you. If this is a little bit more of a restrictive open license, but you can also require that people don't make derivatives of the work. So in other words, if they use your work, they cannot change it at all. They have to present it in its original format and vision.
Mhm.
They cannot change anything. So you can sort of modify that base Creative Commons license. And even below that, you have a foundation of Creative Commons Zero, which just means straight to the public domain. If you want to give me credit, great. If you don't, I can't sue you. Like we have, this is essentially the licensing that I've agreed to. And you can use this in any way that you want for any purpose that you want. Um, so I think a little bit of background training on what Creative Commons is and how it actually works would be another really helpful foundation for folks to have in their back pocket when they're thinking about how do I use content. Because I know I've talked a lot about, Pexels being Creative Commons 0, and if I forget to provide attribution for an image or a video that I use, I'm not putting myself or the company in legal peril. But not every site is going to provide resources through Creative Commons 0, and you might have attribution requirements that if you don't meet would create a bit of legal peril. So you want to make sure that people are making responsible choices, but also giving credit where credit is due.
Right.
So those are some of the things that immediately came to mind for me, that extend on some of the things that you were sharing a bit earlier.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that understanding the Creative Commons licenses is probably one of the first steps to take when you're getting into open education resources and things like that. Just sort of understanding where you're going to need to attribute things and what those different licenses mean. There is a guide out there. If you go to Creative Commons, it kind of shows you the different symbols and exactly what the licensing things mean. And if you're looking for more resources and understanding more about open education resources, UNESCO in 2019 published their first guideline or recommendations for OER. And you can find that just by Googling UNESCO and OER. And there are many out there. We've also shared here today a list that we keep up to date. Stephen Laddick and his team keep a list of OER resources that they update regularly that you can find at elearningmagazine.com. It's shared in the comments here today. So if you are looking for some other OER resources that we haven't mentioned today or just want to know what else is out there, that's a great resource for you. Double check that. We've got the bit.ly up here right now at the bottom of the screen as well, so you can access that. That's a part of our team here at OpenLMS who keeps a lot of up-to-date information about OER and other things. So definitely check out the eLearning Success magazine there as well if you're really interested in some other topics and expert talks. Um, but I think that's kind of like really what we were aiming for today. I think we've
Yeah.
gotten through a lot of what we wanted to talk about related to open source and open education resources and kind of the difference between the two and some of our favorite things and some
Mhm.
practical pieces um, of things that you would need to know in order to implement some OER at your place. Um, we are really glad that you joined us this month. Please make sure that you join us next month. Next month, we will be talking about making an impact, as next month is World Education Day is next month, and we will be talking about all the ways that we can make an impact in education. If you ever want to get in touch with either one of us, both Michael and I, as well as OpenLMS, are on LinkedIn and other places. Please feel free to connect with us. We would love to chat more with you. Um, Otherwise, we hope that you are having a happy, healthy, warm, if you are in the Northern Hemisphere, December. And we look forward to seeing all of you back here in January. Thanks so much for joining us today.
All right. Take care, everyone.